Is this on? It is, isn't it? Great, fantastic. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here, my name's Gavin Duncan. It's my job to introduce the next speaker. The next speaker is Attila Demkó, who has a long history in terms of education in historical matters, but mainly defense and security. Now, he's going to talk today about climate change, but at the moment, as well as being a well-published author, he is the head of, now I've written it down, head of the Center for Geopolitics at MCC, the Mathias Collegium. What else is there to say about him? Well, his work experience and postgraduate training is firmly rooted in modern defense security, so there's that. But in addition to that, Attila has worked for the Hungarian government in various departments, mainly in areas connected to defense. Okay? There's really nothing more that I need to say apart from to introduce Attila. Attila, would you like to come on? And the stage is yours. A big hand for Attila. Come on, come on. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin, for this very nice introduction. As Gavin said, I'm not a climate scientist. Actually, I'm not a scientist. I'm a security policy expert. So my approach to this subject is different than the usual you hear. And of course, in security policy, we use a different time frame. Our time frame, the longest horizon for us is about 30 years, no more. While the time scale of climate change is in the centuries or in millennia. 2100 in my work is so far out that we don't really deal with that, since there are so many variables in scenarios that making such scenarios is basically meaningless. And I believe that climate change is a primary security issue. But climate change does not stand alone. Climate change is also a driver of other threats and other problems, and related definitely to environment, population, resources. Of course, climate is very much related to food production, agriculture. And all these are interlinked with climate. So I talk about all these questions. In my profession, we examine the full picture, so you will not only hear about climate during this presentation. And I really believe that, that climate is a threat in itself and an important driver of other security threats. But climate is only one driver, believe me, it's only one driver. The main question of my presentation, I have a main question in this presentation, if climate is the most important for the next 30 years. I talk about until about 2050. So let's have a look at what the latest science tells about climate change. And I used the 2021 assessment of the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. So it's pretty new data what I use. And I can tell you that there are rough times ahead. So it's not very easy times ahead of us. At least 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise is highly likely by 2040. And I can tell you that we are about at a 1 degree baseline now over the climate of the pre-industrial age, so about before 1900. The global sea level, actually the global sea level is rising for 20,000 years. It's not something new, but the tempo is being increased. So from year to year, the global sea level is rising faster. And of course, the heating up of the atmosphere will lead to more severe weather in most regions. So let's see again from security policy perspective what sea level rise means in these 30 years. So actually we always say, and it's quoted, that 600 million people live in areas, coastal areas, less than 10 meters above sea level. And of course, we also hear a lot about Greenland. It's always on the news, on BBC, CNN. And if Greenland melts, the whole island melts, we're going to have a sea level rise of 7 meters. It's a lot. But what actually happened in the last 100 years? In the last 100 years, we had a sea level rise of about 20 centimeters. 20 centimeters. It's not insignificant, believe me. It's a problem already. And models of future sea level rise generally give a maximum around a meter until 2100. There are different estimations from 26 centimeter to 77 centimeter, but only if we keep it at 1.5 degrees. So, and I'm not sure we will keep it there. But anyway, this meter is right now seems plausible. And by 2050, I always talk in this presentation of 2050. It's somewhere between 15 and 25 centimeters. So again, it's not insignificant. Does it really pose a danger for the 600 million people quoted so much, so frequently in the next 30 years? No way. So not for 600 million people. But definitely it's a problem for millions, especially in small Pacific islands. And you hear about Bangladesh with a reason. Bangladesh is a very low-lying country with a very huge population. So yes. And of course, we shouldn't forget that what happens in the next 30 years may lock future sea level rise. So it's a significant thing. It's not to be overlooked. But I believe that mass migration because of sea level rise is the problem of the 22nd century or the late 21st century. So it's beyond the scope of my presentation. So let's have a look what IPCC tells about this. So that's the projection, that 2-meter rise above the 1900 level will be around the middle of the next century. So 2150 at the earliest, but only if we don't do anything. So only if we continue as business as usual. And 10 meters is basically so far away, even in the worst case scenario, that it's meaningless to talk about it. I'm just saying this because you hear quite a lot about 10 meters, about the melting of Greenland, and about mass migration because of sea level rise tomorrow. Okay, it's not tomorrow, but it can happen. It can definitely happen. You can see the data. There are different scenarios, of course, so I'm using the baseline scenarios of IPCC, which was published just now, a few months ago. So what about rainfall? Because rainfall is the second most important in many ways thing. So what about rainfall? There are two very vulnerable regions, the Indian subcontinent with 1.8 billion people and Africa with 1.3 billion people. If there is no rain, or if there is a problem with monsoon in India and the Pakistan region, and if there is no rain in the Sahel, that means desertification, that means failure of crops. So it's a very important issue. So what is the situation with predicted rainfall? Anyway, there is a list of countries which were most affected by climate change in 2019. And as you can see, most of these countries are from these two regions, the Indian subcontinent and Africa. And of course, you see some other countries, the Bahamas, Japan, because of cyclones hitting them. But these countries, especially Japan, can cope with climate change. That's the issue, if a region can cope with it or cannot cope. So the most countries in the Indian subcontinent and the African continent are very vulnerable to rainfall. So let's see the maps. So actually, you can see there is one misconception about climate change, especially in Hungary, that we believe that climate change leads to a drier climate. Generally, it's not true. These maps are, of course, global averages, but as the science tells, the latest science from the United Nations and from hundreds of experts, it tells that most of Africa and the Indian subcontinent, as you can see on the map, will be wetter with global temperatures, not drier. Actually, the global temperature is during glacial maximums. So that when there is an ice age, and that the maximum ice age is the driest period. So actually, warmer weather holds more water, so that's why it's not true that it's going to be desertification everywhere. But some regions, as you can see, will be very hard hit with less rain. So what may happen in Europe? We are in Europe, so let's focus on Europe first. And it's not good what is happening. We're going to see very large increase in temperature, higher than the global average. Shorter winters, which may sound good, with more rain and snow. Melting glaciers, permafrost, this is not good. We will see more intensive floods. So what happened this year in Germany will happen again and even more severe, most probably, in the future. We're going to see, of course, sea level rise, except for the Baltic region. The Baltic region and Scandinavia is different because the land is uplifting too. Because of the last ice age, it was pushed down by the ice. So there you will not experience much sea level rise. And of course, what we have seen in Hungary also, we're going to have more frequent and more deadly heat waves. So, but with all this, you remember the vulnerable countries I talked about? Europe is far from being the most vulnerable continent. So we are not as much danger as Africa or the Indian subcontinent because we are rich in Europe. And we can mitigate dangers much better. What happens in Hungary? So actually, for some it's good news. We're going to have a more Mediterranean climate with less frosty days, with less severe winters. And it's a funny news, but on paper, Budapest has a subtropical climate. I always tell when somebody asks for me, what is this? Because it's also in Wikipedia. I say that don't believe in this. Come to January in Budapest and you will see it's not a subtropical climate. But you know, there are certain numbers which went up very much in Budapest. So we are in a warmer weather already compared to the baseline. And of course, we have more extreme heat, increased less rain, and we're going to have the rain more on the winter, during the winters. In summer, less and more intensive. Actually, we see it now in Hungary, that if there is rain, it's very intensive, and it can pose problems, especially in cities and hilly areas. Main problem for Hungary, actually, the main problem that most of our water comes from neighboring countries. And there are debates and problems with some of the neighboring countries. Dam construction, deforestation is a problem. Even if there is the same amount of rain, if there is no forest on the slopes of the Carpathians, we're going to have much bigger floods. And this is happening in certain neighboring countries, that they destroy the forest. And of course, we cannot do anything about that. And there are dam constructions, some water pollution. But even with this, I tell you that Hungary is, as I said, Europe is not the most vulnerable continent. We always hear that Hungary is among the most vulnerable countries in Europe. It's not true. Southern Europe will have much bigger problems. So let's see why. So these are the maps. I don't have a pointer, but maybe you can see that 1.5 degrees raise of temperature, 2 and 4. And as you can see, both in temperatures, we're gonna see an overall rise in Europe. So all European countries will be warmer in whatever scenario. But look at the rain. So rain is really, really important. For Hungary, rain in the winter season, as I said, more rain. In the summer season, the 1.5 degree scenario shows a 10 to 20% change, less rain. All the other scenarios show, the middle scenario shows basically the same amount of rain during the summer, and the 4 degrees scenario, which is really, really extreme, shows again a 10 to 20% decrease in rain. But it doesn't mean that Hungary is going to be a desert. It's not going to be a desert with this. We have to manage water better, but we can do that. So Hero Square will not be flooded, and we're not going to see camels in the middle of Hungary. But 4 degrees is a problem. If it would be 4 degrees Europe, Spain, Italy, Greece, that would be terrible. Have you seen what happened in Greece this summer? We could experience it in Italy. Spain would be a desert, so it would be very bad. Interestingly, the same 4 degrees, as if you look at the map, would mean a greener Sahel region and a bit greener Sahara. So what is bad for one region is not necessarily bad for the other region. But let's not talk about 4 degrees we're not going to have a 4 degrees rise until 2050. 1.5 or 2 at maximum, according to the science of IPCC. So are we okay with 1.5 degrees rise within our time frame? Not really. And with 2 degrees, even less. And there are big differences actually between the two. And the problem is that when we look at the science, these are projections on inherently insufficient information. Climate is a very big system. Things we can predict, yes, but we cannot predict everything, and we especially cannot predict the likelihood of extreme weather. I mean, it's not on the maps if really large parts of Europe are going to see much more storms. And what we absolutely cannot say is what will happen if climate changes from one moment to another. It can happen basically from one decade to another. Climate can have a very abrupt change. It happened 11,000 years ago after the Ice Age ended. There was a short new Ice Age because of such an occurrence. And below, the next slide is from a 2000. I had a similar presentation in 2005. So this slide is unchanged slide from 2005. And I don't know if you have seen the movie The Day After Tomorrow. This is the day after tomorrow scenario when the Gulf Stream slows down or stops. And that would be a huge problem for Europe. And what I said 15 years ago, based on the science of IPCC, it is unlikely, but it can happen as early as 2020. So, not happened, but it can happen. And it would be extremely bad for Europe. But the fact that the fact is that abrupt climate change did not happen by 2020. Again, you remember the movie, what it predicted. But it doesn't mean that it did not happen, that it cannot happen in the future. It is just not very likely, especially by 2050, that it will happen. But we have to have it in our back of our mind that climate can react not only a linear way, but in a very swift, unpredictable way. But what will happen for sure? So I changed to another subject a bit. What will happen for sure that affects our environment and security to a very large degree? Population will increase for sure in Africa by 1.2 billion people. 1.2 billion people. That's almost 100% increase over the current population. And if we don't help Africa now or in the next few decades, this increase will continue until at least 2100, so for 80 more years at least. And why do I say that? I said that climate science, it's science, but still there are many variables. In demography, there are less variables, so you can predict demography much better. Believe me that demographic predictions are usually far more correct than any other things in a security policy we try to predict. So we do know for sure that 1.2 billion people will live in Africa in one generation, and that is almost 3 times of the population of the European Union today. Okay, 3 times of the European population added in less than a generation to Africa, and of course almost 4 times of the US population. So it's a big number. And I personally believe, and it's maybe controversial, that in no way, shape, or form climate will put as much stress on African environment, climate change, in the next 30 years as the doubling of the population. It's not going to be 100% more stress on Africa. And what does it mean? This 1.2 billion people will be also a global driver of climate change. We always say that it's only the West responsible for everything. But actually, deforestation happens because people need agricultural land. They go to the forest, and they didn't cut the trees. Usually it's by fire. They destroy lands. And of course, it's very natural because they need the agricultural land. Desertification happens also. Can you imagine that if you have a huge herd, it needs water? So you pump out much more water from the reservoirs than it goes in by rain. So desertification, And what other threats? So actually, social conflict, wars, mass migration, it's already happening in many countries. It's already happening. And it's because mainly of population explosion. So let's have a look at the numbers. Nigeria. Nigeria in 1950 was around 30 million. 2020, 204 million. 2050, 400 million. 400 million is almost the population of the European Union and higher than the population of the United States projected at 2050 on 1 million square kilometer. Europe is much bigger territory-wise. US is much bigger territory-wise. Niger. Niger had 2.5 million people. It's going to end up by the end of our period at 65 million. And 185 million by 2100 if nothing happens. Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, there is a civil war now. There is a terrible civil war. And we always hear about the ethnic problems. But there is also a civil war because of land. Because communities need land for their children. And sometimes they take from the others. There is an almost war between Sudan, North Sudan, and Ethiopia because of a very, very fertile agricultural region. It's about, actually, it's a war or conflict for agricultural land and water. It's already happening, and it's not because of climate change there. It's because of much more people competing for the same amount of resources. And look at the European Union. European Union is going down. Hungary, we're going to have half the population by 2100, 8.5 million. So actually, we started a higher population than Morocco or Rwanda or Niger. Niger, 65 million people. Hungary, 8.5 million people. So this is unsustainable, believe me. Of course, these numbers are not going to go up to these numbers I show you, because there will be a civil war, migration, disasters before it happens. So this is Africa in 2100 if we don't help the continent. If Europe, United States, China don't help Africa to cope with this. You can see, for example, the Congo. This is one of the biggest rainforests. And Uganda next. Congo and Uganda together is 600 million people. What will happen to the rainforest with 600 million people? Also, as I said, Nigeria with 800 million people. So I still have some time, but I think I'm going to finish it here. So I believe that the most pressing issue for our generation for the next 30 years is not a possible unbearable hothouse water world in 2100, but an Africa under extreme strain by 2050, in one generation. We need realism. We need realism, not ideology in approaching the climate and population crisis. And we need to help. We need to help these countries, the least developed countries, to tackle both. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.